The morning I decided to go back, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee I didn't even want. My phone was face down on the counter. I already knew what the voicemail said. My aunt had left it twice, once at 11 p.m., once at 6 a.m., like repetition would make it easier to hear. My mother had passed. Quietly in her sleep, the way she'd done everything in her life, without making a scene, without asking for anything, without calling attention to herself. I stood there and listened to the coffee drip and thought about the last time I'd seen her. 7 years ago. A gas station off I-90, halfway between her world and mine. She'd driven 3 hours to meet me there because she couldn't let him know she was coming. We ate vending machine crackers in my car, and she held my hand and cried and told me she was sorry. I told her I didn't blame her. I think I even meant it. That was the last time. So no, the voicemail wasn't a surprise. The surprise was what happened after I got there. Let me back up. I was 19 when my father told me to leave. Not asked, not suggested. Told. With the kind of flatness in his voice that meant the decision had been made long before the conversation started, and the conversation itself was just a formality he was willing to sit through. The reason doesn't matter, and also it matters completely, so I'll tell you. I had applied to a college 2 states away without telling him. Full scholarship, art history. He found the acceptance letter in the mail before I could get to it, and that was that. You want to go live someone else's life, he said. Then go live it somewhere else. I thought he was posturing. I thought if I apologized, if I explained, if I just got small enough, he would walk it back. My father had always been a man who needed to be the largest thing in the room. I had spent 19 years learning how to make myself smaller so there would always be room for him. I thought I knew the rules, but the rules had changed and nobody told me. By the end of the week, I had a trash bag with some clothes, $200 I'd saved from waitressing, and a note my mother had slipped under my bedroom door that said, "I love you. I'm sorry. Don't stop." No last name, no forwarding address, just those 3 sentences in her small, careful handwriting. I drove until the gaslight came on, pulled into a motel parking lot in a town I'd never heard of, and sat in my car for a long time trying to figure out who I was allowed to call. The answer was nobody. I won't romanticize the next 2 years because there's nothing romantic about it. I couch-surfed. I worked doubles at a diner outside of Columbus that smelled like fryer oil and didn't ask for references. I slept in my car twice, once in November, which is the kind of cold that makes you understand why people make bad decisions just to get inside somewhere warm. I got into the college eventually, deferred a year, explained the situation to the financial aid office, cried in front of a woman named Linda who had the decency not to look away. I graduated. I got a job at a small design firm in Philadelphia. I got a studio apartment with a radiator that clanged all winter and a fire escape I used as a garden. I built a life. It wasn't the life anyone had drawn up for me, but it was mine, and I had earned every square inch of it. I met my husband at a work conference in Chicago. He spilled coffee on my laptop bag and apologized so sincerely and for so long that I started laughing and couldn't stop. He was a federal investigator with the Department of Labor, which sounds dry until you understand what that actually means. He spent his career following money, finding where it went when it wasn't supposed to go anywhere, and making sure the people who moved it faced consequences. He was methodical and patient and quietly, devastatingly good at his job. He was also the first person who ever looked at me and said, without any asterisks, "You didn't deserve any of that. We got married 4 years ago. Small ceremony. My aunt came. My mother did not, couldn't," she said, without explaining why, and I didn't push. And then, on a Tuesday morning in October, my phone was face down on the counter, and she was gone. My husband found me still standing at the coffee maker 20 minutes later. He didn't say anything at first. He just put his hand between my shoulder blades, that warm, steady weight, and waited. "She's gone," I said. "I know. The funeral is Friday." A pause. "Do you want to go?" I thought about my father. I thought about the town, the way it had always organized itself around him, The way people there understood without being told that there were allegiances required just to live there comfortably. The sheriff had gone to high school with him. The pastor owed him a favor I'd never fully understood. The neighbors had watched me load that trash bag into my car, and not one of them came outside. "Yes," I said. "I think I finally do." My husband looked at me for a long moment. Something shifted behind his eyes, not worry, exactly, more like calibration. "Then we'll go," he said. "I want to tell you I felt ready. I want to tell you I walked into that funeral home on Friday afternoon like someone who had processed her grief and arrived at acceptance. But grief doesn't work on a schedule, and I had 19 years of complicated feelings about my mother that had never had anywhere to go, and they were all there in the car with me the whole drive out. She had loved me, I knew that. She had also chosen, every single day, to stay with a man who made loving me cost something. I didn't hate her for it. I had spent a long time trying to understand it, and I had arrived somewhere that felt less like forgiveness and more like a tired, aching compassion, the kind you feel for someone who was trapped in a way you can see clearly from the outside, and they couldn't see at all from the inside. My husband drove. I watched the landscape flatten and open up, the trees thinning out, the sky getting bigger the way it does when you get far enough from the city. "You okay?" he asked. "Somewhere around hour 3. Ask me again later." He nodded. He knows when not to push. We got a room at a motel 20 minutes outside of town. I wasn't staying at the house, and that was not negotiable. I showered and put on the black dress I bought specifically for this, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a while. I looked like my mother. I had always looked like my mother. My father used to say it like it was an insult. I took a breath. I picked up my bag. I went. The funeral home was smaller than I remembered. Everything about that town was smaller than I remembered. My aunt met me at the door and hugged me hard and long, the way you hug someone when you've been waiting years for the chance. She smelled like the same lotion she'd always worn. I had to press my lips together to keep it together. The room was arranged the way these rooms always are, folding chairs, flowers, a photo board near the casket with pictures I mostly recognized and a few I didn't. There was a version of my mother in those photos that I had never gotten to know. Young, laughing, her hair loose, standing somewhere sunny. I stood in front of them longer than I meant to. I felt him before I saw him. That's not dramatic, it's just true. 19 years of reading a room for his presence, scanning for the shift in air pressure that meant he was nearby and I needed to adjust. Old habits don't unlearn themselves just because you leave. I turned around, and there he was. He was older. Of course he was older. But the posture was exactly the same. That particular way of standing that said everything in this room is mine, including the space you're taking up. He was wearing a dark suit and an expression of controlled grief that I recognized as performance. My father had always been a man who understood that emotions were most useful when other people could see them. He looked at me, and for just a moment, something cracked in his face. Just for a moment. Then it closed. He crossed the room. I didn't move. "You have no business being here," he said. Quietly, pleasantly, almost. The way he always delivered his worst lines, like a man commenting on the weather. "She was my mother," I said. "You stopped being her daughter a long time ago. That was your choice. It wasn't, and we both knew it. But I had stopped arguing that point around year 3 of being gone. I'm here to say goodbye to her. That's all." He stepped closer. I could see the sheriff near the back of the room, arms folded, watching. I could see a few of the neighbors, people I'd grown up around, people who had known me since I was in pigtails, all of them very carefully looking elsewhere. "I'm giving you the chance to do this quietly," my father said. "Walk out. Don't make a scene. You don't have to be part of any of this." Part of what, exactly? The service, the estate, any of it. He said it like he was offering me a gift. "Your mother had a life insurance policy. I'm the named beneficiary. You're not in the will. There is nothing here for you. You're not in the will. There is nothing here for you." I looked at him. I thought about my mother's handwriting. Don't stop. 2 words. Whatever she meant by them, and I had turned them over in my mind more times than I could count. I had not stopped. Whatever she was asking me not to stop doing, I had kept doing it, and she had known I would. I know about the policy, I said. Something moved in his eyes. I know about the letter she sent to the insurance company 14 months ago, I continued, keeping my voice level. The one where she requested that the beneficiary documentation be reviewed. I watched his jaw tighten, just barely. He was good at keeping his face still, but he wasn't perfect. There is no such letter. There are actually two. The company has copies, so does her attorney. I paused. Did you know she had an attorney? She hired one 3 years ago. Very quietly, very carefully. The room had gone still in a way that had nothing to do with us being at a funeral. My father took a step back. It was small, barely perceptible. But it was the first time in my life I had ever seen him take a step back from me, and I felt it everywhere. You're lying, he said. But his voice had changed, just slightly. I'm really not. What happened next is where things got complicated. My father recovered quickly. I'll give him that. He turned to the sheriff and said something low, and then the sheriff was walking toward me with his hand up, and there were words being said about disrupting a funeral service, creating a disturbance, and before I fully understood what was happening, there was a hand on my arm. I want to be honest about this part. I was scared. Not of being arrested exactly, but of the old familiar feeling of being in that town, in that room, surrounded by people who had made their loyalty clear years ago, and understanding that the rules here were not the rules anywhere else. They put my hands behind my back. I heard my aunt make a sound like she'd been struck. I heard the murmur go through the room. And then I heard my husband's voice, very calm, very clear, from somewhere to my left. I'm going to need you to stop right there. The hand on my arm paused. My name is Owen Hartley. I'm a senior investigator with the Department of Labor, Office of Inspector General. He was already holding his credentials out, badge and ID, open and level, the way you hold something when you want there to be absolutely no confusion about what it is. I've been working in coordination with the State Attorney General's office on an ongoing investigation into the misappropriation of retirement and pension funds due this county over the past 11 years. The individual you are currently assisting has been a named subject in that investigation for the past 7 months. The hand on my arm let go. Silence. Real silence. The kind that happens when a room full of people all stop breathing at the same time. My father said, "That's absurd." My husband looked at him with the kind of patience that only comes from someone who has spent years being lied to by people who were very sure they were going to get away with it. "Mr. Voss," he said, and hearing my father's name said that way, in that tone, in that room, "you have the right to an attorney. I'd strongly recommend exercising it. I won't walk you through the next 2 hours in real time because honestly, parts of it are still blurry to me. There are things that happen when your body has been running on adrenaline and grief and old fear for an extended period of time, and one of them is that your memory starts keeping only the important parts. The important parts. My father was escorted from the funeral home. The sheriff left shortly after, looking like a man who had just done a fast calculation and not liked the result. My aunt held my hand through the rest of the service. I stood in front of my mother's casket and I talked to her quietly for a few minutes. I don't need to tell you what I said. It was between us. My husband stood near the back of the room the whole time. He didn't hover. He didn't make it about himself. He just made sure I knew without a single word that he was there. Afterward, in the parking lot, my aunt told me something she said she'd been carrying for years. My mother had reached out to her 2 years before she died. She had started to understand, slowly, painfully, what my father had actually been doing. Not just to me, but to her, to their finances, to the life she'd thought they were building. She hadn't known how to leave, but she had known how to leave things behind. She had updated her insurance documentation. She had worked with an attorney to outline what she actually owned separately. She had made sure there was a record. She had spent 2 years quietly, carefully, making sure that when the time came, I would not be left with nothing. Don't stop. That's what she'd meant. She wasn't asking me not to stop moving forward. She was telling me not to stop existing in the world, not to let him make me small again, not to stop being her daughter just because he'd told me to. She had been fighting for me the whole time. She'd just been fighting the way she knew how to fight. Quietly, carefully, without making a scene. The estate took another 8 months to settle. I won't pretend it was simple, because it wasn't. My father had spent years structuring things in ways that were designed to make them difficult to unravel, and unraveling them took time and documentation and a great deal of patience from people who were much better at this than I am. But the insurance policy. The letter, the attorney my mother had hired, the documentation she had quietly assembled over 3 years, it held. It all held. I used to think that the defining moment of my life was the night I drove out of that town with a trash bag and $200 and nowhere to go. I used to think that was the thing that had made me who I was. The loss, the survival, the years of building something from nothing. I don't think that anymore. I think the defining moment was standing in that funeral home, listening to a man tell me I didn't belong there, and knowing, really knowing, in my bones, that he was wrong. I had belonged there. My mother had wanted me there. She had spent years making sure that when I came back, I would have something to come back to. She never stopped being my mother. She just had to do it in the only language she was safe enough to speak. I have a daughter now. She's 18 months old, and she has my mother's eyes, and she has never once in her life had to wonder whether she was wanted. I have made sure of that, and I will keep making sure of it every single day for as long as I get. I have a home that is mine. I have a career I built. I have a husband who looked at a room full of people with a lot of power and a long history of using it badly, and said, "Not today," without raising his voice, without flinching, without asking me afterward if I was grateful. I have a fire escape with herbs on it that get too much sun in the summer and somehow survive anyway. I have my mother's note, still. It's in the top drawer of my dresser, under everything else, in a small envelope with no address on it. I don't take it out very often, but I know it's there. I love you. I'm sorry, don't stop. I haven't. People ask me sometimes if I feel like I got justice, like there was a verdict handed down and a gavel came down and that was the end of it, clean and complete. And I understand why they frame it that way. Because we all want that. The moment where the balance tips back, where the thing that was taken gets returned, where the person who caused the damage finally has to face it. But that's not really how it works. At least, that's not how it worked for me. What I got wasn't a verdict. What I got was a Tuesday morning standing in a parking lot outside a funeral home in a town that had never once stood up for me, holding my aunt's hand, understanding, for the first time, that my mother had spent the last 3 years of her life trying to make sure I would be okay. That's not justice in the Hollywood sense. That's something quieter and, I think, more real. Here's what I've come to believe, and I'm not saying this to sound wise. I'm saying it because it took me a long time to actually understand it. The choices people make don't disappear. They accumulate. My father spent decades making choices about control, about money, about who deserved to matter, and those choices built something. They built a structure, and structures eventually show their cracks. You can't take from people indefinitely without consequence. You can't silence everyone forever. Somewhere, something keeps a record. In this case, it was a paper trail, a quiet attorney my mother hired when she finally understood what was happening. A husband who spent his career following money and knew exactly what he was looking at. My mother made choices too. I lived a long time being sad about the ones that cost me. But she also chose, in the end, to fight, just not in a way I could see while it was happening. She fought slowly, carefully, in the only language she was safe enough to speak. And that mattered. That changed everything. I think about what it took to build my own life after I drove out of that town at 19. The diner shifts. The car that overheated twice on the way to Columbus. The financial aid office and the woman named Linda who looked me in the eye when I cried. None of it was graceful. Very little of it was fair, but every single piece of it was mine, and building it taught me something that no one could take away. I am capable of more than the version of me my father decided I was. That's the thing about being told you're nothing. Either you believe it or you spend your life proving it wrong. I chose the second one, not out of anger, not to spite him, but because I was 19 and terrified and the only other option was to stop, and my mother had already told me, in her small, careful handwriting, not to stop. So I didn't. Owen stood in the back of that room, not because he was making a point. He stood there because that's who he is, someone who shows up and stays. My aunt held my hand because she'd been waiting years for the chance to do exactly that. The people in your life who choose to stay, who choose to show up on the hard days without being asked. They are not a small thing. They are everything. I don't know what happened to my father after that day in any detailed sense, and I found I don't need to. What I know is this. My daughter will never spend a single day wondering if she is wanted. I will make sure of that every morning for the rest of my life. That is the choice I get to make. That is the one thing that is entirely, completely mine. The fire escape is full of herbs that get too much sun and somehow survive anyway. I think about that more than I probably should.